Months turned into years, and Marcus's journey became more than just a personal victory. It evolved into a legacy of change. The reforms sparked by his case began to take root, transforming not only the city where it happened, but also inspiring movements in other parts of the country. Body cameras became standard equipment for officers nationwide, and independent oversight boards were established to investigate complaints against law enforcement. Training programs now emphasized empathy, accountability, and respect for all individuals, regardless of their background. While progress was slow and imperfect, Marcus took pride in knowing that his ordeal had planted seeds of hope in places once dominated by fear. Through Voices Unheard, Marcus continued to amplify marginalized voices, ensuring that no one faced injustice alone. The organization grew rapidly, attracting volunteers, donors, and advocates from diverse walks of life. It offered free legal assistance to victims of police misconduct, hosted community forums to foster dialogue between residents and law enforcement, and created educational materials to teach people how to navigate encounters with authorities safely. Marcus often said, "Knowledge is power," and he made it his mission to equip others with the tools they needed to protect themselves and their loved ones. Marcus's family remained at the heart of everything he did. Lisa stood by him through every late-night strategy session and every emotional speech, her unwavering support keeping him grounded. Together, they taught Mia and Elijah the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. The children thrived under this guidance, growing into compassionate and courageous young individuals. Maya developed a passion for art, using her talents to create murals that celebrated diversity and resilience. Elijah, inspired by his father's courage, dreamed of becoming a lawyer someday, someone who could fight for justice like Marcus. As time passed, Marcus found moments of peace amidst the chaos. He cherished quiet mornings, sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. These small joys reminded him of why he fought so hard, not just for systemic change, but for the simple pleasures of life that everyone deserved to enjoy without fear. On weekends, the Johnsons returned to the park where their nightmare had begun, reclaiming it as a place of happiness. They flew kites, fed ducks, and laughed together, proving that love and determination could overcome even the darkest storms. The impact of Marcus's story extended far beyond his immediate circle. His case became a cornerstone of discussions about racial equity and police reform, studied in classrooms and debated in legislative chambers. Documentaries were made, books were written, and awards were given, but Marcus never lost sight of the real goal: creating a world where no child had to witness brutality, and no parent had to endure the pain of being treated as less than human. One day, while addressing a crowd at a national conference, Marcus shared a reflection that summed up his journey. "Justice isn't something you achieve overnight," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It's a process, a marathon, not a sprint. And sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting the most." His words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the audience. Though scars remained, both physical and emotional, Marcus wore them as badges of survival and strength. He knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. With his family by his side, his community behind him, and his unyielding belief in justice guiding him, Marcus continued forward, step by step. In doing so, he proved that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, light could emerge from darkness, and hope could triumph over despair. The guilty verdict sent shockwaves through the city, igniting conversations about accountability and reform in ways no one could have predicted. For Marcus, the courtroom victory was bittersweet. Yes, the officers had been held responsible for their actions, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. The bruises on his wrists had faded, but the memory of being dragged to the ground in front of his children lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. If anything, the trial had amplified his voice, turning him into a symbol of resilience, and hope for countless others. In the weeks following the verdict, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work with renewed determination. He partnered with civil rights organizations to push for sweeping changes within law enforcement. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers in the city, and new policies were implemented to ensure stricter oversight and accountability. Training programs focused on de-escalation tactics and cultural sensitivity were introduced, aiming to prevent similar incidents in the future. While some critics dismissed these efforts as mere band-aids, Marcus saw them as steps toward lasting change. But Marcus didn't stop there. He founded an organization called *Voices Unheard*, dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and educating communities about their rights. Through town hall meetings, workshops, and online campaigns, *Voices Unheard* empowered people to speak up when they witnessed injustice. Marcus traveled across the country, sharing his story at conferences, universities, and community centers. His speeches weren't just about anger or frustration. They were calls to action, urging people to channel their pain into purpose. At home, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Lisa noticed subtle shifts in Marcus's demeanor. He laughed more often now, especially during family game nights or weekend hikes with the kids, but she also saw how deeply the experience had changed him. Late at night, after the house grew quiet, Marcus would sit by the window, staring out at the stars. Sometimes, Lisa joined him, holding his hand without saying a word. They didn't need to talk. Their presence alone was enough to remind each other that they were in this together. Mia and Elijah, too, began healing in their own ways. At first, they were hesitant to leave the house, fearful of encountering police cars or flashing lights. But with time and plenty of reassurance from their parents, they started opening up again. Mia drew pictures of her father standing tall against injustice, while Elijah wrote stories where heroes always won. Their creativity became a source of light during dark times, reminding Marcus why he continued to fight. Public opinion shifted dramatically in Marcus's favor. Once seen as just another name in headlines, he was now regarded as a champion for justice. Awards poured in, recognizing his bravery and leadership. Yet Marcus remained humble, deflecting praise onto those who supported him along the way. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about every person who has ever felt powerless. We're proving that change is possible." Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Some accused Marcus of using his ordeal to gain fame, while others argued that punishing a few officers wouldn't fix deeper systemic issues. Marcus acknowledged these criticisms, understanding that true transformation required patience and persistence. He knew not everyone would agree with his methods, but he also knew silence wasn't an option, not when lives were at stake. One evening, as Marcus tucked Elijah into bed, his son asked a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Daddy, will the bad guys ever learn?" Marcus paused, considering how to answer. Finally, he smiled softly. "Some will," he said, "and for those who don't, we'll keep teaching them until they do." It was a simple promise, yet it carried the weight of everything Marcus stood for: hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of justice. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Marcus Johnson's trial began. It wasn't just any case, it was a moment that felt larger than life, drawing attention from across the country. Reporters filled the rows, their cameras clicking incessantly. Activists held signs outside the courthouse, chanting slogans about justice and accountability. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, charged with emotion. For Marcus, this wasn't just about seeking retribution for what had happened to him. It was about exposing truths that many in power would rather keep hidden. As he sat at the plaintiff's table alongside his partner Sarah, Marcus couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between himself and the defendants, the four officers who now faced him across the room. They wore stoic expressions, their uniforms pressed and polished, while Marcus appeared calm but resolute, dressed in a sharp suit that spoke of dignity and purpose. The weight of what they had done hung heavy in the air, yet there was no apology in their eyes, only defiance. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Sarah presented video footage captured by bystanders, showing every brutal moment of Marcus's arrest in chilling detail. She played the clips slowly, pausing at key points to highlight the officer's aggression and disregard for protocol. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the images made it impossible to deny the injustice. Next came witness testimonies, neighbors who had seen the arrest, strangers who had filmed it, and even one officer who admitted off record that the accused men had a history of misconduct. Each story added another layer to the narrative, painting a damning picture of systemic failure. Medical reports were also submitted as evidence, detailing the injuries Marcus sustained during the incident. Deep bruises on his wrists from the handcuffs, scrapes on his knees from being thrown to the ground, and lingering soreness in his back told a physical story of pain. But it was Marcus's testimony that truly captivated everyone in the room. When he took the stand, his voice steady and measured, he didn't just recount the events. He shared the emotional toll it had taken on him and his family. He spoke of the fear in his children's eyes, the helplessness of watching his wife cry, and the betrayal he felt knowing the very system he worked to uphold had turned against him. "I've spent my career fighting for justice," Marcus said, his words echoing through the silent courtroom. "But when I needed justice the most, I was treated like a criminal, not because of anything I did, but because of who I am." His statement resonated deeply, not only with those present, but also with millions watching online. Social media lit up with reactions as people praised his courage and called for meaningful reform. The defense tried to counter by questioning Marcus's credibility, suggesting he might have provoked the officers or resisted arrest. But their arguments fell flat under scrutiny. Surveillance footage showed Marcus complying fully, and witnesses confirmed his calm demeanor throughout the ordeal. Even attempts to discredit the videos as edited or taken out of context were dismantled by expert analysis proving their authenticity. By the time closing arguments arrived, the verdict seemed inevitable. Sarah delivered a powerful speech, reminding the jury of their responsibility to hold the officers accountable. "This isn't just about one man," she said passionately. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it." When the jury finally returned with their decision, the room fell silent. As the foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts, a wave of relief washed over Marcus. Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes, and cheers erupted outside the courthouse. Justice had been served, but Marcus knew this was only the beginning. True change wouldn't come overnight, but this victory gave him hope and a platform to keep pushing forward. The moment Marcus stepped out of the precinct, the crowd erupted into cheers. Strangers clapped and shouted words of encouragement, while friends and neighbors rushed forward to embrace him. Lisa pushed through the throng of people, her eyes red from crying but filled with relief as she threw her arms around him. "You're home," she whispered, her voice breaking. Behind her, Mia and Elijah clung to their father's legs, tears streaming down their faces. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel the warmth of being reunited with his family. But as he looked around at the sea of faces, some familiar, others not, he knew this victory was only temporary. Walking out of that precinct didn't mean justice had been served. It meant the real fight was just beginning. Inside the holding cell earlier, Marcus had spent hours replaying the events of the day in his mind. The officers hadn't listened to him or cared about who he was. They hadn't even bothered to check his credentials before dragging him into custody. It wasn't just about what happened to him. It was about what it represented. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a system that dehumanized people based on the color of their skin. As much as Marcus wanted to go home, hug his kids, and forget the nightmare, he knew he couldn't. He owed it to himself, his family, and everyone else who had ever faced similar injustice to speak up and take action. Back at home, the house felt different. The once cozy living room now seemed smaller, quieter, as if the walls carried the weight of what had happened. Marcus sat on the couch, flanked by Lisa and the children, staring blankly at the coffee table. His phone buzzed constantly with calls, texts, and social media notifications. Friends, colleagues, reporters, and activists all wanted to talk to him. Some offered support, others advice, and a few simply expressed outrage. But Marcus couldn't bring himself to respond yet. Instead, he turned off his phone and focused on his family. He needed this time to breathe, to process, to remind himself why he fought so hard for justice every day. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the house early, armed with legal documents and a plan. She and Marcus had worked together for years, and she knew exactly how to approach cases like this. Over cups of strong coffee, they went over the details. Sarah explained that they had more than enough evidence to file a lawsuit against the police department, not just for wrongful arrest, but also for excessive force and racial profiling. Videos recorded by bystanders, witness testimonies, and medical reports documenting Marcus's injuries painted a damning picture. "We'll make sure they can't ignore this," Sarah said firmly. Marcus nodded, determination replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. Meanwhile, the story continued to dominate headlines. Local news stations aired interviews with residents, many of whom spoke passionately about the need for reform. National outlets picked up the story too, framing it as another example of systemic racism within law enforcement. Prominent civil rights organizations issued statements demanding accountability, and petitions calling for investigations into the officers' actions garnered thousands of signatures overnight. Even politicians weighed in, some offering condolences and others promising legislative changes. The pressure mounted on city officials, forcing them to address the growing public outcry. At the precinct, the 4 officers involved in Marcus's arrest found themselves under intense scrutiny. Internal Affairs launched an investigation, suspending the men pending review. Rumors swirled about their past behavior. Allegations of misconduct, discriminatory remarks, and unchecked aggression surfaced almost daily. Though none of this could undo the trauma Marcus endured, it gave him hope that change might finally be possible. As days passed, Marcus began preparing for the legal battle ahead. He met with Sarah regularly, poring over documents and strategizing every move. But he also made time to heal, to laugh with his kids, share quiet moments with Lisa, and reflect on everything he still had to fight for. This ordeal had shaken him deeply, but it had also reinforced his purpose. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. After all, he had spent his life fighting for justice. Now he was fighting for himself, and for countless others whose voices deserved to be heard. As the unmarked police car sped away with Marcus in the backseat, Lisa stood frozen on the sidewalk, her mind racing. The sound of her children sobbing pierced through her shock, pulling her back to reality. She wrapped her arms tightly around Nia and Elijah, trying to shield them from the nightmare they had just witnessed. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, dialing Marcus's law partner again. This time, she didn't just cry. She begged, "Please, you have to do something. They can't just take him like this." On the other end of the line, Sarah, Marcus's partner, listened intently. A seasoned attorney herself, she knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. "Stay calm, Lisa," Sarah said firmly but gently. "I'll get to work right now. We'll figure this out together." With that promise, Sarah sprang into action. She contacted influential colleagues, reached out to civil rights organizations, and began drafting emergency motions to secure Marcus's release. Meanwhile, Lisa stayed by the side of the road, holding her children close as neighbors started to gather around her. Word of Marcus's arrest spread rapidly through the neighborhood. People who had seen the incident or watched the videos shared online couldn't believe what had happened. To them, Marcus wasn't just a name. He was a friend, a neighbor, a man who had always been there when someone needed help. The idea that he could be treated this way seemed incomprehensible. By late afternoon, small groups of residents had gathered near the park, where Marcus's family had planned to spend their day. What started as murmurs of disbelief soon turned into louder conversations about accountability and justice. Social media played its part too. Footage of the arrest, captured by several bystanders, went viral within hours. The clips showed everything: the officer's aggression, Marcus's calm attempts to explain himself, and the terror etched on his family's faces. Comment sections exploded with outrage. Some viewers recognized Marcus from news stories about his legal victories against corrupt systems. Others simply saw a man being wrongfully targeted because of the color of his skin. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EnoughIsEnough began trending, drawing attention not only locally but nationally. Local activists wasted no time organizing protests. Flyers were printed and distributed, urging residents to come together peacefully at the precinct where Marcus was being held. By evening, hundreds of people had gathered outside, holding signs that read "No justice, no peace, and end police brutality." Among them were friends, colleagues, and even strangers who felt compelled to stand up for what was right. The atmosphere was charged with emotion: anger, sadness, frustration, but also determination. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, sharing personal stories of discrimination and calling for systemic change. Inside the precinct, Marcus sat alone in a dimly lit holding cell. His wrists ached from the tight handcuffs, and his knees still stung from scraping against the pavement. But physical pain was nothing compared to the weight of what he was feeling. How could this happen? He had spent years fighting for justice, yet here he was, a victim of the very system he sought to reform. As he sat there, staring at the cold concrete walls, he thought about his family. Were they safe? Were the kids okay? And then he thought about the bigger picture: the countless others who had faced similar injustices but didn't have the resources or platform to fight back. Outside, Lisa arrived at the protest with Mia and Elijah. Though exhausted and heartbroken, she felt a sense of solidarity among the crowd. Strangers hugged her, offering words of support and vowing to stand by her family until Marcus came home. For the first time since the arrest, Lisa allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, all these voices raised together could make a difference. By midnight, the pressure on local authorities had become unbearable. News outlets picked up the story, airing clips of the arrest and interviews with outraged community members. Lawyers worked tirelessly behind the scenes, filing motions and demanding answers. Finally, after hours of relentless advocacy, a judge granted bail, allowing Marcus to walk free. For now. As he stepped out of the precinct into the cool night air, greeted by cheers and applause, Marcus felt both relief and resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment Marcus hit the ground, the air was knocked out of him, not just from the force of being thrown down, but from the sheer shock of what was happening. His knees scraped against the rough asphalt, and the sharp sting of pain shot through his legs. Before he could even catch his breath, one of the officers pressed a heavy boot into his back, pinning him to the ground. "Stay down," the officer barked, his voice cold and unyielding. Marcus instinctively raised his hands in surrender, palms open, trying to show he wasn't resisting. But it didn't matter. Another officer grabbed his wrists and twisted them behind his back, snapping handcuffs on so tightly that they dug into his skin. Lisa screamed from inside the car, her cries cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Please stop. He hasn't done anything wrong," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled with desperation as she tried to shield Mia and Elijah from a horrifying scene unfolding before their eyes. The children were frozen in terror, clutching each other as they watched their father being treated like a criminal. "Daddy," Elijah shouted, his small voice cracking under the weight of fear. Marcus turned his head slightly toward the sound, his heart breaking at the sight of his son's wide, tear-filled eyes. "It's okay, buddy," he managed to say, though his voice was strained. "Everything will be fine." But everything was far from fine. The officers showed no signs of slowing down. One of them leaned over Marcus, shouting accusations that made no sense. "Where's the stolen property? You think you can run around doing whatever you want?" Marcus struggled to process the words. Stolen property. What were they talking about? He hadn't taken anything. He was just driving to the park with his family. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said firmly, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm an attorney. Please let me explain. His words fell on deaf ears. Instead of listening, the officers grew more aggressive. One of them yanked Marcus to his feet, shoving him hard enough to make him stumble. Another muttered something under his breath, words meant to demean rather than communicate. The tone of their voices, the way they handled him, left no room for doubt. This wasn't about justice or fairness. This was about power, control, and prejudice. As Marcus stood there, helpless and humiliated, passers-by began to gather. Some looked horrified, whispering to each other about how wrong this seemed. Others pulled out their phones, capturing every painful moment on video. The flashing lights of the unmarked police car cast eerie shadows across the street, illuminating the stark contrast between Marcus's calm demeanor and the officer's unchecked aggression. Despite the growing crowd, no one stepped forward to intervene. Fear kept them at bay, but their cameras told a different story, one that would soon spread far beyond this quiet neighborhood. Through it all, Marcus focused on staying composed. He knew losing his temper would only make things worse. Still, the injustice of it all burned inside him. How could this be happening? Why weren't they listening? Each second felt like an eternity, stretching endlessly as the officers searched his car without permission. They rifled through bags, opened compartments, and tossed items onto the ground, looking for evidence that didn't exist. When they found nothing incriminating, they seemed even angrier, as if Marcus's innocence was an inconvenience rather than proof of their mistake. By now, Lisa had managed to call Marcus's law partner, frantically explaining what was happening. On the other end of the line, the partner assured her they would do everything possible to help. But for Marcus, standing there in handcuffs while his family watched, the damage was already being done. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a public display of cruelty, one that would leave scars far deeper than any bruise or scrape. And as the officers shoved him into the back seat of their cruiser, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal was only beginning. As Marcus continued driving, the unmarked police car stayed firmly behind him, its presence growing more noticeable with each passing second. The initial flicker of unease in his mind began to solidify into concern. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, this time not to admire his family's smiles, but to study the vehicle trailing him. It wasn't unusual for police cars to patrol neighborhoods, but something about this situation felt off. Still, Marcus reminded himself to stay calm. He was a law-abiding citizen, and he had nothing to hide. The road ahead was clear, and Marcus approached a red light at the intersection. He slowed down smoothly, coming to a complete stop as the traffic signal glowed bright against the sunny sky. His hands rested naturally on the steering wheel, positioned at 10 and 2, just as they always were. In the back seat, Mia and Elijah chattered excitedly about their plans for the park, oblivious to the tension slowly building in the car. Lisa, however, noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with worry. Before Marcus could respond, flashing blue and red lights erupted behind them, reflecting off the mirrors and filling the interior of the car with an unsettling glow. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "It's probably just a routine stop," he said, more to reassure his family than anything else. He rolled down his window, letting in the warm breeze, and waited patiently for the officers to approach. But what happened next shattered any illusion of normalcy. 4 men emerged from the unmarked car, their movements brisk and aggressive. They didn't walk casually or casually ask questions. They stormed toward Marcus's vehicle with an intensity that sent a chill through everyone inside. One of the officers leaned close to Marcus's window, his expression stern. Without introducing themselves or explaining why they had pulled him over, the officer barked, "Step out of the vehicle now." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the sudden hostility. "Can I see your badge first?" he asked politely, his tone calm but firm. It was a reasonable request, one meant to ensure accountability. But instead of complying, the officer grew angrier. "I said step out of the car," he shouted, his voice loud enough to startle the children in the backseat. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, and Elijah clung tightly to his mother's arm. Confused but determined to de-escalate the situation, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and raised his hand slightly, showing he posed no threat. "Sir, I'm happy to cooperate," he said evenly. "Could you please tell me why I've been stopped?" His words seemed to have little effect. Another officer moved to the driver's side door and yanked it open so forcefully that it startled Marcus. Before he could say another word, rough hands grabbed him by the arms and pulled him out of the car. Lisa gasped, clutching her children closer as they watched their father being dragged onto the pavement. "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" she cried out, her voice trembling with fear. The officers ignored her, focusing solely on Marcus. Passers-by began to slow down, some stopping entirely to witness the unfolding scene. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the incident as it escalated further. Despite the chaos around him, Marcus tried to remain composed, repeating his name and profession in hopes of resolving the misunderstanding. Yet, none of it mattered. To these officers, Marcus wasn't a respected attorney or a devoted father. He was simply a target. And as the seconds ticked by, it became painfully clear that this wasn't going to end quickly or quietly. In a calm and peaceful suburban neighborhood, where tree-lined streets were filled with the laughter of children playing and neighbors exchanging warm greetings, Marcus Johnson lived a life many admired. His home was always open to friends, family, and even strangers who needed advice or support. Marcus wasn't just any ordinary resident. He was a man whose presence commanded respect, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through years of hard work and dedication. A former Marine, Marcus had transitioned into civilian life by becoming a civil rights attorney. He spent his days fighting for justice, particularly for those who felt voiceless against systems that often worked against them. Marcus's wife, Lisa, was his rock. She balanced his intense schedule with her own quiet strength, ensuring their household remained a sanctuary of love and stability. Together, they raised two bright and curious children, 8-year-old Mia and 6-year-old Elijah, who adored their father. To them, Marcus wasn't just a lawyer or a community leader. He was their hero. Whether it was coaching Elijah's soccer team on weekends or reading bedtime stories to Mia, Marcus made sure his family always came first. On this particular Saturday morning, the sun shone brightly, casting golden rays over the neatly trimmed lawns and flower beds. The air smelled fresh, carrying hints of blooming jasmine from nearby gardens. It was the kind of day that made people want to step outside and enjoy life. For Marcus, it was an opportunity to slow down and reconnect with his loved ones. After a long week filled with court appearances and late-night research, he decided they would spend the afternoon at the local park, a favorite spot for picnics and kite flying. As Lisa packed sandwiches, fruit, and juice boxes into a cooler, Marcus helped the kids choose toys to bring along. "Can we take my kite, Daddy?" Elijah asked excitedly, holding up a colorful dragon-shaped kite. "Of course," Marcus replied with a smile, ruffling his son's hair. Mia chimed in, asking if she could bring her sketchpad to draw the ducks by the pond. With everything ready, Marcus loaded the items into the car, while Lisa ensured the kids were buckled safely into their seats. The drive to the park was short, and the atmosphere inside the vehicle was lighthearted. The radio played soft music, and the kids giggled as they talked about what they wanted to do first. Marcus glanced at his rearview mirror occasionally, catching glimpses of his family's happy faces. In moments like these, he felt truly content. Life wasn't perfect. No one's ever was. But he cherished the simple joys. The sound of his children laughing, the warmth of Lisa's hand resting on his knee, and the knowledge that, despite the challenges he faced professionally, he had built something beautiful here. Little did Marcus know that this seemingly ordinary day would take a drastic turn. As he navigated the familiar roads, an unmarked police car appeared behind him. At first, Marcus thought nothing of it. Perhaps the officers were responding to another call or simply patrolling the area. But when the vehicle stayed close, matching his speed, a flicker of unease crept into his mind. Still, he remained calm, assuming it was nothing more than a routine check. What happened next, however, would leave an indelible mark not only on Marcus and his family, but also on the entire community, and perhaps the nation itself.